Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today to talk more through the AI Act and how it's impacting medical devices here in Europe. I'm really happy to be joined today by Anne van Kronkelsven from Matrix Requirements, as well as Leon Dawn from CARE. Before we get started, maybe Anne, you could give us an introduction to who you are, what your role is here at Matrix Requirements.
Thank you, Adam. So my name is Anne van Kronkelsven. I have a background in bioengineering, and since 2011, I've been active in RAQA, Regulatory Affairs Quality Assurance in the medical device industry. I've been working for startup companies, for multinationals, and since 2017, I joined Matrix, also taking care of regulatory affairs and quality assurance.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Anne, for the introduction. Leon, let's jump into a little bit about CARE. What's your role? What are you doing with AI and medical devices?
Sure. So great. Nice to be here. So I joined the medical devices field similarly like Anne a long time ago, over 15 years now. I've been working with a lot of different companies, smaller and larger. And over the last 7 years, I worked at a company that makes AI-based software to detect abnormalities on lung CT scans. Unfortunately, I left the company and started for myself in November last year with the organization called CARE. And now I'm trying to support manufacturers in the field of medical devices that develop AI systems as well. And over the past years, I've very closely monitored developments around the AI Act, but also in the field of standardization. So this is a little bit of the background, and I'm trying to apply the knowledge that I gained over the last years to support other manufacturers and bring their devices to the market and implement their quality systems.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks so much for the introduction, both. So as mentioned earlier, today is a continued discussion around the AI Act in Europe. What does it mean? For a reminder for some of you that maybe aren't fully up to speed with the AI Act, it is the first regulation on artificial intelligence, and the use of artificial intelligence within the EU is going to be regulated by the AI Act, which is the world's first comprehensive AI law. It's a bit of a tongue twister. So today we're going to look into more specifics around the AI Act and its objectives. The goal here is to dive into data governance and privacy as it stands today, as well as understanding more information around technical documentation that will be impacted by the AI Act. So let's dive straight in. As we met last week, Leon, can you briefly remind us of the main objectives of the AI Act and how it impacts AI development and deployment within the European Union?
Yeah, maybe it's good to start with saying that we have, obviously, in our field, medical device regulation and also the in vitro medical device regulation. Those regulations are product legislation. When AI was coming to the market in the first instances, I guess that the European Commission saw that there was a risk in the use of AI that is different than the risk of the use of medical devices. Medical devices, for example, can impact on safety. AI, in the view of the European Commission, can, for example, impact fundamental rights of humans, but also clearly it can also affect the safety of human beings. And they determined that they needed to have a new regulation in place. But there's immediately one of the first problems is how do you do that properly? And I think that it probably had some good discussions about the best way to do this, and decided that it should be through a product legislation, which is very similar to the product legislation we already have for medical devices and in vitro medical devices, so that it can actually serve two purposes. Purpose one is to govern any product that's today out on the market that makes use of AI, but is not regulated as a product. Those will be fully regulated through the AI Act, but also to introduce requirements to address those risks regarding fundamental rights, safety, and health as add-on to existing product legislation like we see for medical devices and the IVD regulation. So the AI Act should be seen as one, a self-standing regulation, and two, as an add-on to the existing legislative frameworks that exist.
Super clear for me. In terms of one of the key words that you mentioned, you talked about requirements. It's something that we hear very often within the medical device industry as well, requirements management. And I'll throw the question out to you. How do you see today, based on your experience with our customers, what we see on the field, do you see that the AI Act is going to have an impact on medical device manufacturers?
Yes, well, for sure, because before what we saw, what our customers with AI components were doing was, of course, documenting all of this in their requirements, trying to find their own way of dealing with this specific type of product that they have, for which there weren't that many rules, legislation, standards out there. And over time, the first standards started to come. They tried to integrate that in their documentation. And now with the AI Act, they are provided with a stronger framework. The only problem at this point, I guess, is that it's so new and it's not specifically made for their products. It's not specifically made for medical devices or anything else. So that they are still trying to figure out how to integrate that new set of requirements coming from this legislation into their existing documentation. And that, I think, is a first big challenge, that together with new standards that will still come, and they will continuously have to update and manage all these new requirements and integrate them in the documentation that they have already for their products today. So Leon, maybe also interesting to have your opinion on this. How do you feel that medical device manufacturers that already have an AI product on the market, how should they deal with the new requirements coming from the AI Act?
It's a super cool question, and I think, and this is where we dive a little bit into the details. So, and as mentioned in the introduction, right, you have the AI Act, which is a self-standing part of regulation, but it also adds requirements for existing regulations. So if you see it, how the AI Act is being built up, it divides AI systems into different types of levels of risks, and the level of risk will determine the requirements that apply. If you consider medical devices and you look at how they've integrated this, then in one of the starting articles where they explain the classification of AI into different categories, you'll see that all medical devices and IVDs are considered high risk, which include, well, except to be fair, for class 1 medical devices that do not need notified body conformity assessment under the MDR or IVDR. If you look at those aspects, then for the high risk AI, there's a lot of additional, well, first, a lot of the items that are covered in the MDR are also covered by the AI Act. Let's give two basic examples. Medical devices will need to have technical documentation. AI systems will need to have technical documentation. That's item 1. Medical devices will need to have quality management systems, or the manufacturers, obviously, of those medical devices. 2, the providers of AI systems under the AI Act will need to have quality management systems. There are a lot of these documentations, and another one is also the IFU, for example, on labeling. So AI systems that are high risk will need to have an IFU. So you'll see that there's a lot of these requirements that are listed in the MDR also exist under the AI Act. And the European Commission and the European Parliament and Council have stressed a lot of times in this AI Act that as much as possible, those requirements should be integrated into the existing systems of the sectoral law. So, for example, if the requirements for quality management system require that you have a document control procedure, you can just have one document control procedure. You don't need to have an additional one under the AI Act as compared to the medical device regulation. And that is good news for medical device manufacturers. So the main thing that medical device manufacturers will need to do is to determine the delta. So what are the additional requirements that are set out in the AI Act for quality systems, for technical documentation? How does that relate to, for example, the design and development procedures? If you look at the AI Act, for example, it will require you to document a lot more in detail how your AI system actually works. And you'll need to add that to your design and development procedures, so you make sure that you capture that as early on as possible. And at the same time, you document that in your technical documentation for the medical device. Eventually, and I think this is one of the latest developments we've seen in the AI Act, medical devices will need to be assessed against the AI Act under the conformity assessment procedure executed by the notified body. In essence, this can be the same notified body, this can be the same conformity assessment procedure, but the notified body will look at that additional delta of requirements set out in the AI Act. But does this make sense? Am I going too much into detail?
No. I mean, the one thing that I'm seeing and hearing a lot here is lots of data, lots of transfer of data, a lot of also alignment between what is in the AI Act and what is relevant for a medical device. So it feels very closely related. But once again, I think what's interesting here is around this data topic of privacy. How do we ensure that the data that the AI Act is introducing is going to be as secure for AI systems or within AI systems? Are you seeing, or what are some of the data privacy challenges that companies are going to face under the AI Act?
So this is one, sorry to jump in here, and if you have anything to add, please fill me in. One thing to note is that the data governance, right, is not a topic that's currently really covered by the MDR or by the IVDR. So specifically, when you look at data governance, you'll see that the AI Act is bringing on a lot more requirements for medical device manufacturers than that they had to deal with before. Obviously, GDPR is already applicable, so you need to consider data privacy. But what will be considered, for example, is that you need to make it more explicit, where you obtain, for example, in the pre-market stage, where you get your data sets, your training data set, your validation data set, you'll need to make sure that you document properly how you've gotten that data, how subjects that are within those data sets have actually provided their consent, just to avoid that you might be using data where users have not been granted the right level of protection under the GDPR. So you need to make that much more explicit in your documentation. That's one. But then continuously, right, you need to have data governance procedures for when the AI system actually goes out onto the market. So when the AI system is on the market, that you do not accidentally expose any of the data that was used for training the AI algorithm or data that was used for validating the AI algorithm, for example. One of your considerations as well as a manufacturer, right, is that your data sets, for example, I assume that any manufacturer will consider their data sets to be confidential. Maybe the data set as they've gotten it, but the data set might be public, but then every manufacturer will label those data sets for the training purposes. And I think that organizations will probably consider that part of their intellectual property. So one, you want to protect the privacy of the people that might be represented within those data sets. Two, as an organization, you want to protect the data set in a proper way through proper security measures.
And I'm not sure if maybe you have some interesting insights around this within the medical device industry or what you've seen on the field.
Well, I think it's indeed very important to protect personal data in those data sets, but I think there is an increased risk as well in terms of cybersecurity and protection of data from that respect. Because what we saw before, when people were attacking certain devices on their own, like insulin pumps, they would try to get information from that, but they were really looking at one particular device. Here with the AI sets, of course, the data sets used and created are much bigger and therefore also much more interesting for people with bad intentions that want to hack and steal that personal information that is contained in those data sets. So I think in terms of information security and protection of data, there will be much more challenges and risks with the use of AI, the extended use of AI, the increasing use of AI.
Yeah, maybe it's also because manufacturers just sit, as you mentioned, on just a much larger pool of data. And in order to use the products in the actual clinical practice, they'll be reviewing a lot more patient data. So patient data will potentially exit the standard use environment to go into the AI algorithm. If an AI algorithm, for example, is being run over a cloud instance, then all that data would leave the hospital and would enter the cloud and would be returned to the hospital. And obviously you can pseudonymize to a certain extent, but if you anonymize it, you can never feed the results back into the hospital system. And those systems, when the data leaves the hospital environment, obviously that is going to introduce a certain amount of risk that needs to be governed by the manufacturer.
Absolutely.
For sure. I mean, so protect your data is probably the key takeaway from this point. But I mean, secondary to that, ensuring that the data that is being used to train an AI system, also making sure it fits the intended use and its intended purpose, is equally important to data privacy. How can manufacturers, or what are some things that manufacturers should keep in mind to ensure that their data is clean and clear from biases?
It's a very good question. So the AI Act actually demands that manufacturers will, specifically in their training sets, will research whether there's potential bias that could be in there, and obviously the same will go for the test data sets. So when they construe their data sets, especially the test data sets, they need to make sure that they can actually test for potential biases that are present in the training data set. But that already starts probably by testing the training set. One of the things that manufacturers should consider, right, is specifically within their clinical evaluations and within their literature searches, is put specific focus on considering, are there any known biases within the specific medical field that I'm looking into? For example, if you look at applications that are used for sorry, I can't pronounce the word properly. For the screening of breasts, this makes it a little bit easier. The density of the breast, for example, can be different for certain subpopulations. So you want to make sure that you pick that up from literature, and you want to assess whether that has an impact on how the AI algorithm will eventually work. So you want to avoid that, for example, a specific subpopulation will have a lower level of performance. And similarly, if it does have a different performance characteristics, you want to be transparent about it in your instructions for use, so that if a user will be aware that if they use it on a specific subpopulation, that it actually performs maybe slightly better, slightly worse, or that they should adjust the procedure to ensure that it will work accurately.
Very clear. Very clear. And so I suppose maybe we can jump into some top tips. We've touched on quite a few things here already, but I mean, from what I'm seeing is, data protection is key. Don't wait. What other sort of top tips should manufacturers take away from this at the moment?
I'll have a few. I think one, when you obtain your data sets, make sure that you document the information that you have around the data set about how the data was acquired, whether people have provided their consent, and make sure that your procedures actually include requirements with regard to how you obtain such data. Have clear data management procedures. Other aspects, obviously, regarding the data sets is that you know what is in the data set, whether the data set is actually fully representative of the intended purpose of the device that you are developing, or for the intended purpose of the AI system, what it's going to be used for. Another very interesting point that we really didn't touch on, but might be worth calling out, is that if you are going to be required as a medical device to undergo conformity assessment with a notified body might actually request access to the data sets. Something that might not seem very relevant at first, but there's a lot of cases where you can consider that a manufacturer might not be the owner of the data sets that they've used for training, or might not be the owner of the data sets they used for testing. In the contracts, for example, already with the providers of such data sets, they need to make sure that they can provide the data to a third party, like a regulator, in order to evaluate the data set if that regulator would want to. Not having these requirements already translated into your contractual agreements with the providers of those data sets might put you in a very difficult position when the notified body comes and asks for access to the data set. Because if the provider is not going to provide you that access to an external party, then you might not be able to use that data set for the training and validation of your AI algorithms, which can potentially be problematic for a manufacturer. So review the contracts, have your data management procedures in place, and make sure you read exactly up on the AI, what it will require in terms of data governance. Is there anything from your end that you think is relevant as well that I might have missed?
Well, I think we already mentioned it, but regarding this particular topic, I think keeping in mind the requirements of GDPR, and in case of other regions where you might also be doing or collecting the data, keeping those legislations, particularly on protection of data, personal data, and also integrating that into your procedures. Not forgetting about that, not only focusing on the AI Act, because there are many more legislations applicable to this particular topic.
Yeah, maybe just one item to add here is that if you look at the Declaration of Conformity, for example, under the AI Act, if you process personal data in your AI system, you do not just declare conformity against the AI Act, but it also mandates that you will need to declare conformity against the GDPR. So in that sense, the GDPR and I don't fully understand what the background is of adding this specific requirement to the AI Act, but you might consider that if you need to make a very explicit statement that you comply with the GDPR in addition to the AI Act in the Declaration of Conformity, perhaps the conformity assessment body that will do an assessment of your documentation is also going to be allowed to look specifically into the aspects of how you demonstrate compliance with GDPR. So it is key.
Sure. Very clear. I mean, GDPR is also a fun topic for marketing, but I won't get into that right now. So talking about documentation, I'm super curious to understand more about what are the AI Act's requirements for technical documentation and record keeping?
So the main requirements looking at the technical documentation are, again, some items are very similar to what we have already today for medical devices. For example, you need to provide a device description and architecture, etc. However, it obviously is tailored towards AI. So if you provide your system architecture right now, you might just have an AI component mentioned in there, but then under the AI Act, you might want to go one step deeper and also provide the architecture of the AI system itself. Similarly, in your technical documentation, you will need to have specific considerations indeed with regards to the data that you're using, how that data is being set up. You will need to describe your performance metrics of the AI system. You will need to describe how bias was investigated for the AI system. And there's quite a few of additional topics that are not really explicit, for example, in the MDR, but are explicit in the AI Act. So for manufacturers to do an assessment of the technical documentation requirements compared to what is in the MDR is crucial. There is, again, in the AI Act, there's a separate annex that lays down all the technical documentation requirements. Another one that I haven't explicitly mentioned right now, but is also worth calling out, is the very extensive descriptions you'll need to provide on the AI system itself. So what does the AI algorithm look like? How has it been trained? How was it validated? How was it tested? And what decisions have you made throughout the design process with regard to the AI system?
And Anne, I mean, I imagine that this adds a layer of complexity for you or for medical device manufacturers in particular, in terms of already their pile of technical documentation that they have in place for the medical device. Do you see some sort of key differences or challenges in what Leon has mentioned about technical documentation and how it could directly impact medical device manufacturers?
Well, what I think is important to understand is here, indeed, you have the new requirements in terms of AI and describing this AI. But what is already in the MDR as a requirement is that you need to build that traceability. You have to link everything together. And this will add a layer of complexity to that traceability as well. You have the full description of your AI system, but that AI system is part of a medical device then, and you need to actually link this to everything else related to your medical device. So it might that medical device might not only be an AI algorithm. It exists of software in which it's integrated, the processing, the visualization, everything that is related to the functioning of the medical device. So you need to really integrate all that information related to the AI and link that to the overall information and documentation of your medical device, the risks, the testing, and so on. Another challenge that I see is with the use of harmonized standards as soon as they are being harmonized under MDR and then also in the AI Act. But the use of standards in general, because we briefly touched upon it before, there are standards like the 13485 on quality management systems, but there are other standards for AI manufacturers like the 42001. And how do they relate? How can you merge requirements from both standards? Will they be harmonized? That is also still a question to be answered. Another topic is risk management, for example, where we have 14971 as the standard in the medical device field. But then you have 34971 when it comes to the application of that standard to machine learning system, but you also have 23894 in general about risk management on AI systems. So we have different standards with their own approach, their own perspective on things, and now they have to be put together, see what is applicable, how are you going to implement the requirements of all, and still have one technical documentation file, one technical file to submit to your notified body that actually combines the requirements, is compliant with everything that you as a manufacturer need to be compliant with. And that, to me, is a true challenge at this moment to figure out how to do that, what to change on the existing documentation to be compliant with this new AI Act and the standards that are being published at the moment.
And Leon, I imagine you're aligned in those thoughts as well.
Yeah, it is complex. That's, I think, is the first thing to state. If you look at harmonized standards, so maybe to give a little bit of an explanation of how this process will work. So the European Commission has sent out a request to CENELEC, which is the European standardization body, with the request to prepare harmonized standards to demonstrate conformity against the AI Act. In the programs that have been prepared so far by CENELEC, what I have seen, there is no explicit mention of an array of using medical device standards to bring forward for harmonization, for example, ISO 13485, whereas 42001, the QMS standard that has been, well, it's not really a QMS standard, to be fair, it's a management system standard that has been prepared to try to demonstrate compliance against these requirements set out against the AI Act, also doesn't seem to be fully aligned with the requirements of the AI Act. So there's still a lot of debate into what standard should be brought forward, whether, for example, sector-specific standards can be included, yes or no, and what the role will be of sector-specific standards under the AI Act. And that's something that we should closely monitor in the next years to come, because the transition period for the AI Act for the medical devices field will be 3 years. It's expected to be in place somewhere halfway this year to come into force. Then the transition period starts. And it's a bit questionable whether there will be fully harmonized standards available somewhere along those 3 years that you can use to demonstrate compliance against the AI Act. Ideally, there will be medical device specific standards. If that's going to be there is still unclear. One of the nice developments to mention, and I think Anne already called it out on risk management, for example, the 34971 that was developed by AMI in conjunction with BSI, has now been put forward as a standard for development as a 24971-2 technical report that's going to explain how to apply 14971 to AI based medical devices. If that can be brought forward, for example, to use 14971 as a harmonized standard under the AI Act as well for medical device manufacturers, that would avoid duplication and would avoid any contradictions between standards. So that will definitely be the best outcome and the easiest for us as the medical device industry. If that's going to happen remains to be seen.
And I mean, you mentioned a 3-year timeline, which is a big challenge for many organizations to work out which pieces of the puzzle they need to put in place when. It creates sort of a challenge whether they have enough resources in place, whether they actually have the skill sets in place. And my next question to both of you is, how does the AI Act balance between fostering a culture of innovation within this industry rather than imposing regulation on AI and development? Do you think it's hindering or aiding?
It's a super relevant question, and I think a lot of discussions have been going on about this, especially in the last trilogue sessions that took place by the end of last year. We see that there were some changes in the AI Act, and two are specifically aiming to address this concern. So, for example, for micro and SME enterprises, they've entered a requirement, for example, that quality management systems can be in a simplified manner, but also technical documentation will be able for small enterprises and micro enterprises to be in a simplified manner. The European Commission is tasked with setting out forms that will help the manufacturer to understand what they need to do to have simplified technical documentation. If you ask me on a personal note, if I think that is really helpful to support innovation, to some extent, clearly, yes, because it will reduce the resources. On the other end, the question is, if you allow simplified documentation and the technical documentation is actually a risk mitigation in order to ensure safety, to ensure that fundamental rights are being protected, then I wonder if you can do that with simplified technical documentation, why that shouldn't apply to everyone. So in some hand, they're trying to help smaller and micro enterprises, but I wonder if it does not hamper as well the development with large organizations, which typically have larger resources, larger funding to stimulate innovation. And it's a bit questionable whether the AI Act is now not unnecessarily hampering specifically those organizations.
Yeah, for sure. And Anne, do you have any impact or any thoughts on your side?
Well, I agree with Leon on this one. I think it's actually quite risky to give different requirements. That to me doesn't make sense, especially because the AI Act was also, I mean, one of the goals for having that AI Act is to build trust as well. So if you're now going to make a differentiation based on the size of company, kind of, yeah, eliminates that goal a bit. So no, I think what would be beneficial is to have more guidance documents on how to implement, so that it's actually more clear to all organizations, whether they're micro organizations or very big entities, on what is expected and how are we, how do we need to implement the requirements. Once there is more clarity on that, I think that organizations can make their plans in a better way, can make sure that they have the right resources, that they know how to address the different requirements and move forward with that.
Sure. Well, as we're coming to a close for the video today, what I'd love to do is to provide 3 to 5 key takeaways for medical devices with AI that they should be considering before they move into the next steps. I imagine that there is, and based on what we've discussed today as well, a level of urgency around this topic. So Leon, maybe you could start with your key takeaways for a medical device company with AI and what they should be considering today.
I'm going to keep it short and try to limit it to 3. Number 1, prepare today, start informing your management teams today, make sure you have the resources required to start the implementation process. Transition period of 3 years is going to be extremely short. We know where that ended up with medical devices, trying to implement an MDR in 3 years, where there were actually harmonized standards and where there actually were already pre-existing documents under the MDD. So prepare today. That's key takeaway number one. Takeaway number two would be if you're developing a design and development, if you're going through the design and development today of an AI system that's going to be released on the market soon, also embed the requirements already today, because if your device is going to be on the market in 1 to 2 years from now, you will need immediately to demonstrate compliance with the AI Act. There's no time to retrospectively fit it in 2 years later if you're undergoing the conformity assessment procedure. So don't wait, do that today as well. It's going to save you cost and pain and burden in the end. And I think the last tip as a medical device manufacturer, monitor the information, monitor what's happening with regards to guidance documents, join up on an industry organization or within Sensenelec and ISO, just to be on top of what's coming and how this is going to affect you. So you can, as a member, for example, of ISO and Sensenelec, you can already see the standards that are under development, so that if you look at those standards, you'll know what you'll need to do in about a year from now. But you might already be able to take out key messages today. That I think is my 3 main tips.
And Anne, anything from your side?
Well, I think Leon said it all. I mean, maybe just to emphasize when starting to prepare, make that gap analysis, but also prepare to have the resources. So not only money-wise, because these audits will also add a cost, of course, but also in terms of expertise of skill sets within the company or outsourced, but to make sure that you have all of that in place, and if necessary, also the necessary contracts around this to ensure that everything is under control on that front.
For sure, for sure. So if you are a medical device company with AI, start today, look into this, because you have a 3-year deadline that is fast approaching. Make sure that you are looking into the harmonized ISO standards, where you can leverage different standards to align with your medical device requirements, and make sure you have the right requirements and the right resources in place, in-house, external, costs, expertise, to make sure that you can launch your medical device with AI on the market and have no regulation or compliance issues. If you'd like to learn more about how we're working together with CARE here at Matrix Requirements and how we're discussing AI in particular, there will be some links below with links to our AI series. And please stay in touch. Feel free to reach out to Anne, myself, or Leon through LinkedIn, where we can discuss with you more about your questions or any concerns that you may have as you launch your medical device with AI to market. Thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you next time.